All right, welcome along to our session today. The recording basically has kicked off. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your day, as mentioned. So we're here to talk about Microsoft 365 security, and particularly, like I said, with the aim of using Microsoft 365 Business as the baseline to go and achieve that. Now, anything outside that, like I said, I'll generally call out. We will talk about some of the more advanced features, Cloud App Security, Azure Sentinel, and so on that are add-ons, but we will aim to do the basics. So why are we here? Well, hopefully everybody appreciates that we have a major problem when it comes to IT. So here's just a few examples of the problems out there. Again, I advise you to go in and have a look at all of these. This first one here is a very good story about a typical tradie went to make a payment to a vendor. Turned out the attacker had got access to the system, had changed the bank account details. An amount of $51,000 was then paid to the attacker, who magically disappeared, and the bank couldn't do anything about it. And that tradie is not out $51,000. That tradie is out $102,000 because they've got to make payment to the vendor to get the equipment or get the stuff they need to get the job done. So for a small business, that's a two-man or a two-person operation, that's going to be, a big dent in their payroll, in their cash flow. And we've seen the news stories. This is happening all the time. I think the most recent one I saw yesterday was, a council in Melbourne. There's not a day that there isn't mention of, cyber attacks there. So the question we need to ask ourselves as an industry is, why does this keep happening? Why is this allowed to continue? Surely it would have been rectified or minimized by now. We'll go into the reasons why that is. Another very good example is attackers don't really care who they go after. So in this case, they're going after, child nurseries, daycare centers, and they don't care. It's all about money to them. It's a business. They're basically after, getting paid for a simple crime, which is generally across borders, which makes it very easy to enact. Probably the most heart-wrenching one is this one, where basically pretty much the entire Irish Health Service was ransomware. Every machine in that environment was completely locked up. Typically more the admin than the operating theatres and so on. But that system, to my knowledge, is still down. So they are still trying to recover their servers and their desktops. If you have a look at that article, you will see pictures of the military. So the Irish government brought in the armed forces to basically sit there and push buttons in front of PCs to rebuild their environment and to get it back online. So that's sort of, how serious this sort of environment is. Now, what we're going to do at this stage, I am going to ask for a bit of interaction here. So again, you can do this in the privacy and comfort of your own environment. If you would launch a command prompt, doesn't have to be admin or anything, just launch a command prompt, and at the command prompt type MSHTA, hit enter. And if you do not see that same message on the screen, if you see a blank reply or you don't see that message I see there, your system is vulnerable. The system you are on is vulnerable to attack. Right, so MSHTA is a way to launch automated web pages, or what they call application-specific web pages. It is an exe that is provided as part of Windows, and many attackers use that as a way to cloak the ability to run scripts. So if your system permits MSHTA to run, and that would typically be, it would run and there'll be no response, that means your system is vulnerable. The other one I'd get you to run is Cypher and then do a /?. And again, if that does not execute like I have here and basically tell you that it can't be run, then it means that attackers can use tools in the Windows system to run ransomware. So ransomware is about encrypting files on the local machine. what's the easiest way to encrypt files on a local machine? Well, use the inbuilt cipher and encryption capabilities that are already built into Windows to actually do that. So again, two really simple things which aren't done on nearly 100% of systems are disabling live off the land style tools like MSHTA and Cipher. So again, if you've run those two things and you haven't got the same result I've got, then your system, the system you are on right now, is potentially vulnerable for exploit. The reality is that just because the stuff is in the cloud doesn't mean it's not a target. It is an easier target, and the reason is, as the New Zealand CERT calls out, right, it's due to it being common. So again, more and more people moving to the cloud, moving this, and the fact that the security controls are not configured. People are not turning on the capabilities that are provided by the product in the product. And this goes all the way from Windows on the desktop to Exchange to SharePoint to all of the services you probably use today. There are many, many features that are not turned on that are included in the product and, again, would provide a great level of protection. And the example there that I just gave previously about MSHTA and Cipher are two examples. So it's not the fact that the cloud is the issue or that Microsoft 365 is the issue, as it had always been from day one, is the systems need to be configured appropriately. You would never these days put an unpatched, unprotected, unlocked down Windows server onto the internet so that people have direct access. But back in the day, for those of you who remember Blaster and Nimda and all those worms back in the day, that's exactly what people used to do. All right. And we're still making the same mistakes. We're still not doing best practices. And that's what it really comes down to. And the responsibility to apply best practices to environments to secure them falls to the person responsible for the IT. Now, whether that's internal or external, that's what it comes down to. Now, there are a lot of people out there who claim to, or part of their marketing bump these days is to be cybersecurity experts. Everybody's a cybersecurity expert, it seems. Okay, but you have to actually invest the time, learn, and do security. So many people say they do, but they don't actually, right? They're leaving gaping holes in the drive for marketing, for easy dollars, for making the noise to do it. So I would suggest if you are going to do security, if you want to do cybersecurity, is you do it. You do it properly. You invest the time. You put in the effort. And if you're not, that's fine. I don't have an issue. But don't claim to do it and then not be prepared to invest and really study this. Now, when it comes to security, the reality here is that explaining it to end users and customers has been typically done poorly. The reason is that too quickly technical people get into technical discussions about the technicalities of the technical product, and two technicals ago the customer has turned off, switched off, and has no idea what you're talking about. So all of this has to be brought back to the customer in language they understand, and that language is going to need to be very simple. And to me, the simplest way to talk about security is using this diagram here. And the way you address it is you say, okay, if you want us to set up an environment, you need to select which two sides of this triangle you want. So if you want it usable and secure, it's going to cost money to implement, to get the licensing, to configure, to lock down. If you want it secure and cheap, then it's going to be pretty clunky to use. And if you want it usable and cheap, well, guess what? It's not going to be secure. So the first lesson here is that security is always going to be a compromise. So let's take MFA and apply it to this triangle, for example. Now, when you apply MFA, it's going to make the system less usable, right? You're going to have to go through another factor. You're going to be prompted to put in numbers or accept something or click on whatever to make things happen, okay? But it makes the security so much stronger, and it is cheap. Every Microsoft Office 365 SKU comes with MFA. Every social media platform comes with MFA. And I think the statistic is when we have a look at it, but in this case, if you look at Twitter, for example, very common social media platform, something like 98% of users have not enabled MFA on Twitter, including some very well-known personalities. So again, it's cheap, it's there, it's included, but it's not enforced by default, and doing so would make things so much more secure, but people don't do it. And if you ever have resistance to doing those sort of things, you need to make a business decision whether that customer is worth dealing with, to be honest, right? If they are not willing to take your advice and follow acceptable best practices policies, then you need to judge that as a liability on yourself, because you are the one that will be responsible. You are the one that the insurance company's lawyers are going to come after if there is ever a breach. And the analogy I use is you go to customers and say, look, you would never be allowed, or you would never feel safe driving a car with bald tires. Yes, you can get away with it while it's sunny, but as soon as the weather turns poorly and it's wet and it's slippery, your chances of a major casualty to either yourself or an innocent bystander escalates dramatically. You would never do that. No rational person would do that. Cybersecurity is exactly the same. Your nest egg, your business, your cash flow, that is what's paying the bills. That's providing you a living. That's providing a living for employees. If you are subject to a cybersecurity attack, that is potentially for SMB a business-ending event. Can put you out of business in a blink of an eye, like 50,000, 100,000. I think the record I've heard with people, okay, is I think $7.5 million. Okay, so that is the maximum amount I've actually dealt with that has been stolen. So major impacts, and the amount is irrelevant. The impact, basically, to the to the environment. And if you look at the recent Colonial Pipeline issue, right, millions of dollars, shut down the gas supply, the fuel supply for the US, for the East Coast, and caused panic. That was all because of a forgotten account that was still enabled with a bad password and no MFA. And again, there are people in the chat there dealing with the same thing. It is just unbelievable in this day and age that this sort of thing still happens. And that is simply because people aren't being fastidious enough. They're not treating security with the focus that it requires. Now, when it comes to security, some things have changed, right? So the cloud now provides far better protection than it does on-prem, for the simple reason that 9 times out of 10, the vendor is taking care of the infrastructure. So look at the recent challenges, the recent issues with Exchange Server, both used by Microsoft. The online is maintained, managed, protected, monitored by Microsoft 24/7. But anybody with an on-prem Exchange Server is going to be scrambling to cover the vulnerabilities. Now, yes, maybe Microsoft should have done more. Yes, things, should be different. But again, let's face the reality here. The reality here is that's probably not going to be the case, and it's not something to easily implement. So using cloud technologies is going to give you a significant edge no matter how small you are. So back in the good old days, when we're on-prem, you would basically be you versus the attacker. The reality today is that we have an environment where we can utilize, the technologies in the cloud. So if you think of, the upside down triangle here, let me just move this around. Think of all this at the top of the triangle here as where all the logs from all your, so this is coming from Azure AD. This is coming from devices. This is coming from Exchange Online. This is coming from SharePoint Online, and so on. So you've got all these logs piling in, all these events like Windows events on your Windows PC. Now, you're getting millions and millions of those in here. But if you're analyzing those logs at this level and trying to find the needle in the haystack, you're not being very efficient. You're doing something human beings are not good at. They're not good at looking for anomalies in reams and reams of data, which is, again, only increasing. The idea here is that we can implement, things like policies in Microsoft 365. We can implement things like Microsoft Cloud App Security and so on to analyze these signals. And then we can also, to me, at the top of the tree is Azure Sentinel. Right, so at the beginning here, this is where the machine works best. The machines are very good at taking lots and lots of signals and looking for anomalies, like why is the difference between this, this, and this, and then correlating them together. You want to basically allow the machine to apply, the good old AI and machine learning here, so that the human interaction is done at the point where it makes most sense. So if you and your business or you and your staff or whatever, if you're looking at this top level up here, you're not being very productive and you're not working smartly when it comes to the technology. You want to let the machine do all the hard work, and then basically this is the human part that you need to look at. Is there anything in that I need to go through and basically worry about? So again, look at the information, look at the tools, and ask yourself, how efficiently am I using this? Where could the cloud and the latest technologies, AI, machine learning, give me those benefits? So quickly, as an example, and we will get to this, let me just show you what Azure Sentinel looks like. So this is Azure Sentinel from my production environment. So as you can see here, I'm ingesting at the moment 700,000 logs. It gets up to 1 million events. So that's 1 million, think Windows event logs. That's 1 million events from Office 365, Microsoft 365 Defender, Cloud App Security, Defender for Office 365, anti-spam rules and everything. And then what it does is it goes and applies these analytics rules or these queries across the data. So it's applying 202 queries across my environment, looking for anomalies and then displaying that in a nice option here that I can quickly and easily look at. So that's an example, I think, of the quick or the smart way to approach modern security. The machine has the capability to do so much, and all you need to apply, the smart people apply that at the right point, which is generally after the machine's done all the hard work. Now, of course, some things in security don't change. All right, so there are some common rules, or there's some common things that I would call out to you that are basically always going to be the same and are generic enough to apply. So, number one rule to me is, defense in depth. Right? No one product is going to be the panacea to solve every problem. If you ever see anybody claim, or any vendor or any product claim to be 100% guaranteed against attack, run far, run fast, because there is no way you can ever guarantee that. You've got to have layers of defense like castles. So back in the good old days, when they needed to defend something of value, they put up fences, they put up guard posts, they dug a moat, they filled it full of water, they put pointy sticks in it, they had tall walls, they had boiling oil, they made it difficult for an attacker to get through multiple layers, hoping to effectively wear them down. Now remember, your attacker is going to be going after the easy money, right? They're looking for an easy route. The harder you are to kill, the less likely you are to be impacted. They're going to move on to somebody else. Okay? So again, defense in depth. No one solution or technology will solve the problem. Now, the difference I think today is you get a lot more benefit from a single provider, a single stack like Microsoft, because you get that integration capability. The concept of having to have multiple vendors to do security is not valid. Okay, so for example, Microsoft's Exchange policies will scan every email with up to 4 independent antivirus engines. So they integrate and they work with other providers to have multiple engines to do that. So they use their technology but different engines. So that makes sense. But having 4 different types of filters coming into Microsoft 365 doesn't make sense. So again, the idea is defense in depth, but a single stack is becoming a better option because typically a lot of issues with security come at the junction point between products. Different vendors allow more vulnerabilities generally between, how they work and the monitoring and extra work. So the second one I would tell you is that configuration, right, always beats features, right? So when you look at what people and suppliers are talking about, they're always focused on the new bright shiny object, the this, the that, it does this, it works out, it makes you lunch, it bores, does you a cappuccino. That's largely irrelevant because you've still got to configure it. Simple products do their job very, very well when configured correctly. So a firewall does a really good job when configured correctly. Okay, Windows does a really good job when configured correctly. Exchange Online spam filters do a really good job when configured correctly. So don't go and waste money chasing additional features, additional functionality, the latest, greatest shiny object out there in security, right? Successful security is meat and potatoes stuff. It's basically going through checklists and doing the basics, making sure that every option available to you now is configured appropriately before you look at adding additional products and functionality on top of that. So the first order of business is you should go back and audit your environments and say, well, is there more we can do? Is this set up to best practices? What best practices are we following for our policies here? What is the best practice arrangement for this? Because what's going to happen is if there is ever a breach in your customers' environments, they will hand it over to the insurance company who will bring in their lawyers, their own experts who are going to come to you and say, right, where and how did you configure this and what basis or what reference did you use? Right, where are the best practices that you use to configure these policy settings, this firewall, these devices? Show me these policies, these references that you've used. You need to be able to point to, okay, we followed these best practices, Microsoft's best practices, Essential 8 or whatever. Okay, so the idea here is to watch your reference point and again, do the basics. Right, and the other one I would call out here is that in security, right, most people, most things you read out there, they want to be first. They don't want to be right. There's more value creating clickbait headlines. There is more value trumpeting some sort of issue and generating emotion about it rather than actually being right. So be very careful about what you read, vulnerabilities, all that sort of stuff, and have a healthy skepticism to say, hang on, let's read this in detail, take a deep breath. Let's not react emotionally on what these people are claiming is the situation. Okay? Focus on what is right. Focus on what can be fixed. Do not focus on the edge cases. Right? Current Exchange vulnerabilities do not apply to Exchange Online. It's good to be aware of that, but remember that when those articles come out, they're going to talk about Exchange. They're not going to talk about Exchange on-prem. So again, when you hear stuff about security, take a deep breath, remove the emotion, and think about, okay, what's the right thing here? Are these people just trying to be first? Is it a marketing thing? All right. Security is boring. Security is about, again, ticking check boxes off and making sure that things are compliant. Now, obviously, in the Microsoft sphere, there is, lots and lots of threats out there. It's going to evolve. There are new attackers. So one of the newest ones out there is, I don't know if you've seen it, but ransomware gangs are now trying to contact employees directly and do a deal with them and say, okay, employee, if you let us into the system and we ransomware it and we get, $5 million, we will give you $1 million. So this is the sort of thing that you're up against. You've got insider threats. We've got supply chain attacks. So trusted suppliers, SolarWinds, all those sort of things now are potentially vulnerabilities. How can we defense in depth and isolate the facts? So you, as a provider and someone who looks after multiple tenants, you are an Aladdin's cave of treasure troves for attackers. You need to make sure your secure system is more secure than your customers, because you hold the keys to so many systems. And that applies to every employee you have. Now, if for some reason your environment was compromised, what could an attacker get to? They can get to your system, they can get to your customer's system. What damage could they do? There are plenty of examples of MSPs who have given up credentials, and those credentials have then been used against customers to force ransomware payments out of those customers. And there are lawsuits and all sorts of things happening around that. So again, it's not just ransomware. It's not just vulnerabilities. You've got insider threat. You've got all sorts of threats out there, and it's going to be constantly changing and adapting all the time. So if we're practical about this, and again, the idea here is, where's the risk coming from? Where's the majority of our risk going to be coming from? In SMB, as with most customers, the risk is going to come from email. Without doubt, email is the number one entry vector. Please click on this and infect your system. Sure, no problems. I will do that. So that should be where you should be looking to start your journey. You should make sure that that's monitored, that's tracked, that's checked, that's locked down. That is at best practices. What is your strategy for email? And then you move on to the next most likely, the next most likely. But email, without doubt, is the most likely. And the most likely vector from an email is an Office macro. So the user opens an attachment, then an Office macro or a script runs, and then does bad things. So we'll go back to that MSHTA. If I can get an attachment into your organization that will run a script that is tied to that MSHTA, Bob's your uncle, I'm in, I've got access. So that's how it's going to happen. Now, of course, when an attacker gains access to the system, a lot of the times they're just going to sit there and they're going to do monitoring and look and surveillance. So a recent one that I spoke to someone about was the attacker got in for probably about 14 days. They'd been in for 14 days, and then what they did is they found a request for a banking transfer. This was settlement on a property, a commercial property, and they changed the banking details, and that would have resulted in $60 million being sent to the wrong place. But luckily it was picked up, luckily it was stopped, but that's how simple it is. So the attackers are going to come in, they're going to look and perform intelligence. They're going to look who writes the check, who's the bills, what's the state of play, who makes the decisions, who can I potentially leverage to make changes to the environment or corrupt information, and largely it's about money. Now, the other side to think about this is if an attacker ransomwares, they do more than that now. So what they're doing now is they will firstly copy a lot of the data out and use that as ransom, as well as encrypting all the data on-prem. So now they've got a copy of incriminating data. They will continue to come back at you all over and over and over again and hold you to ransom. Once that's gone, that's the end of it. You can't undo that sort of attack. So again, how do we prevent this? How do we stop this from happening? We need to be proactive. Hopefully everybody appreciates billions of dollars are being lost daily on email compromise. It's just so simple. Every day you see it. I don't understand why it still happens. In a world where MFA is free, I don't understand this. But again, when we look at the stats for MFA, you'll see why. People just aren't doing MFA. And again, the really good thing is if I send a phishing email within 5 minutes, there's a 20% chance that it'll be clicked on and it will have executed. That's how quickly I can get a result if I'm an attacker by sending an email to somebody inside the organization. But the defenders have major challenges. The major challenge is going to be you have to protect against every single vulnerability, and as an attacker, I only need to find one. If I'm an attacker, I only need to find one vulnerability to get through that. But again, I'm going to start with the easiest, cheapest options. If it comes to difficult, chances are I'll move on. But the odds are stacked against you. Security is hard work, right? There is no easy option here. It's hard work, and it's consistently hard work. Okay, and that's why you need to be and using the right tools to give you that leverage. Part of the limitations are now everybody's a security company, everybody's a security vendor, every business is pivoting to become cybersecurity, every provider out there is becoming cybersecurity and adding that to their moniker because that's where the money is. Another interesting stat here is on passwords. 80% of breaches typically happen with reused passwords. You know, somebody out there, Adobe, whatever, give up their database list of users and passwords, and then I use that in an automated way against environments that haven't been secured properly. Really easy way to do it, known as password spray attacks. Really easy to do. And that's happening now. I'll show you how to go and check, have a look at that. And like I said, everybody claims to do cybersecurity, but very few people have the skills or the training to do that. So that's where the investment needs to be made. Now, again, as I mentioned, we're up against it. It's very broad. You've now got people working from home. You've got now people using devices. You've got iOS and Android. So I hope that you've seen out there's a thing doing the rounds called the FluBot. The FluBot is basically you will receive an SMS that says you've got a delivery to organize, you've got the results from a COVID test, you've got a voicemail. If you click on that email, that SMS, it will then basically take over your phone. So the malware gets downloaded, put into your phone. It then will steal all your contacts, and it will look to steal banking passwords, mail passwords, and so on. But then it will then use your contact list to send SMSs with the FluBot infection to everybody in your contact list. So if you are, like me, getting lots of these requests for, you know, clicking on all these enticements, it's because those people have been infected with FluBot. And the only way to remove the FluBot, if it's on your system, is to factory reset it. There's no other option. Factory reset, rebuild from scratch, and reset all your passwords. So even on a device, that's a pretty painful process, isn't it? Most people have done that, who have gone through that. It's painful. It's time consuming and it's painful, but that's what we're seeing today, and prevention is worth far more than the cure. Now, all of that stuff I showed you from Sentinel, all the stuff in the Microsoft environment is coming thanks to signals. Now, Microsoft is one of the few organizations of size in the world that is getting trillions and trillions of signals, from logins to emails to they handle something like 10 times the volume of every other mail provider combined. The simple intelligence of the amount of data they're pulling boggles the mind, and that's where you can leverage that advantage in your environment. You know, one of the reasons many people think that, for example, Bing's a second-rate search engine, why does Microsoft keep using it or supporting it? Well, you know what Bing does as well? It crawls the internet looking for bad stuff and reporting that into the security graph, telling Microsoft's database here that, you know what, this site's dodgy, that site's dodgy. So when you have safe links, when you have smart screen, they're all leveraging technologies that Bing has gone out and crawled and identified as being a security threat to the organization. This is the benefit of a large provider with this sort of stack. And you're not going to get this with any other provider that I know of. Now, it would be remiss if we didn't mention the Australian government or government in this at all. So hopefully you're aware there's a notifiable data breach legislation that was enacted 3 years ago that basically requires businesses of all sizes, okay, there are caveats, I understand that, but basically all sizes, to declare a data breach, to publicly announce that data of their customers has been compromised or could potentially be compromised. Now, if you read the latest report, this is a very interesting statement, right? A failure by both the MSP and its clients to notify the Office of the Australian, Information Commission and individuals at risk of serious harm from a data breach will represent a breach of the Privacy Act. So if you have customers who are breached and don't want to disclose, and you know about it and you don't disclose this, then there may be ramifications for you as well. So we now are living in a world where there are more and more requirements from government because people aren't doing the basics. So they're screaming out, the government's option is to come in and legislate. And there is more and more legislation coming in every day. And there's more and more requirements that you're going to have to jump over as a technology provider to do this. Now, I don't know if you've had any experience with working with customers in the European Union, for example. They have quite stringent privacy laws that if I say you are to remove me from your records as a business, you would have to go back through every single backup that contains my information and remove it. So doesn't make sense, I agree, but this is the legislative level that we're going to see. This is only going to become more and more onerous. There's going to be more and more requirements. And I personally believe that the government will eventually mandate that people who do cybersecurity or look after IT environments need to be certified in some way, shape or form, much like accountants, tax file people, people that do tax returns. You're going to have an annual audit by a trained professional to get the green tick of, yes, you're good to deal with. And more companies you'll find are putting requirements in for people they deal with that, and I don't know if you've already seen this, but there are documents that you have to complete if you are going to work with another business. Do I have AV? Am I up to date? Have I got security policies? Have I done end user training? More and more of these government requirements are going to start coming into play. So prepare yourself for this and prepare yourself for the need to, abide by these and be prepared for them. So now is the time to be doing that. Now, the model that I like to use is this one. I like to think of 4 major vectors that can move information or outside a service like Microsoft 365. So you've got email that comes from outside the organization. You've got connections, LAN connections, Wi-Fi connections, local cafe, hotspots, those sort of things. Users, multiple users on multiple devices, and applications, so third-party applications. However, inside the service, you would have a device. The device is registered, Azure AD joined. It is subject to policies, and you have an identity associated inside that, the user's login details, and inside all of that is the data. Now, we need to allow things like email to be sent and received, so they need to cross all these boundaries. They need to go into the service, they need to go across the device, they need to go across identity and then into the data. So whatever model you use, make sure that it's one you understand and appreciate. Now, at every point across any of these borders, logs are created. So when an email enters the system, logs are created. When an email is dealt with on a device, logs are created. When a user logs in, logs are created. That's a good thing so that we can manage those. But do you know where they are and how to get to them and how long they last? Another really good example here is, again, from New Zealand CERT. You'll see this is basically the life cycle of ransomware. And as mentioned, the typical entry points are going to be phishing attacks. Please click on this email and I will infect your system. Guessing passwords, like I said, password spray attacks and exploit vulnerabilities, right? So exploiting things like print nightmare and so on. And again, email and phishing are probably very similar. So this gives you an idea of the flow through here and the impact that they can have. So the idea is typically is once we've got onto a system, we want to take command and control and so on. Now this diagram from Microsoft, I think, illustrates it just as well. So on the left-hand side, we deliver something typically through a malicious email running a script, getting something to run a script. A USB drive is another way that would, again, run a script, automate a script. We have the vulnerabilities which are typically delivered through a browser. So again, email first, and then a browser is probably the second most obvious entry option. And we've also got brute force spray attacks. So then, for example, what will happen is it'll download the additional malware. It will do living off the land. It will use whatever it can find, PowerShell, MSHTA in its environment to embed itself and then look for ways to evade. It will turn off Defender. It will turn off other AVs. It will try and hide itself, obfuscate itself. So if you've seen it happen where an attacker gets control of a mailbox, the first thing they do is create a rule that forwards emails out and then deletes any record of that being sent out. So again, they're trying to cover their tracks. And then again, the idea here is it's going to then look for the ability to escalate its privileges and spread to other computers and then do many other things. So a good example was recently an attacker got access to an email box of a customer. That customer had enough rights to allow the attacker to create a free $200 credit Azure trial for that user. Once that trial was set up, they then went and created multiple virtual machines inside that free account, and they used those virtual machines to launch attacks on other environments. So again, the attackers are smart, and they did all of this within a 12-minute window. So they got access to the mailbox, they created all this, spun it all up, had it all going within 12 minutes. Because they're doing it in an automated way. So again, really, really hard once the system has been compromised. So the rule here is don't let the system be compromised. Right, take those actions. So the best practices are, again, as we talked about, point to things that you can refer to. The Essential 8 is probably the most common one here in Australia. Go and have a look at it. It's not going to give you any specific, set this, do this, click here, do this, but it's going to give you that guidance, and it's going to give you different levels. The Microsoft best practices, there's a whole swag of those around things like Windows 10, Exchange Online, which we'll talk about. But again, do you know these best practices? Have you looked at them? Are you following them? They're there for a reason. They're there for your benefit. So the NIST, so that's the National Institute of Science Technologies, I think. That's a US-based environment. And also CISA, that's another one. And they've got specific requirements or recommendations, around Office 365. So hopefully you've seen or heard of at least one of these, and hopefully you're implementing more, all of these across your environment. All right. Now, the big question is, with all of this, yes, it's all fear-mongering. I understand that, and we know the environment. Great. What do we do? Well, what you do is the first 3 steps are secure score, multi-factor authentication, and conditional access policy. So remember, we're talking about Microsoft 365 Business Premium here. And the idea with Business Premium is that we have all of these capabilities provided to us already. And we should be implementing all of those basically out of the box. So if we go to our environment here and we go to securescore.office.com. It's also in the menu there if you want to go to it. Maybe it's securescore.microsoft.com. Maybe they've changed it and I can't spell Microsoft. Oh, it doesn't like me for some reason. Okay, so let's go back, and I thought securescore.microsoft would have worked. So let me go to my security center. And so it's gone to the old security center. That's a bit annoying, isn't it? That is a bit annoying. I'm sure it was securescore.office.com. No, doesn't like it. Okay. Don't know why that is, but I thought that URL would have worked. So now we're going to have to find it the hard way. So let me go out here. I'm in the compliance center. Why can I not get to the secure score. So maybe what I've got to do is let me go to this, and if this fails, I will go to another tenant. Oh, look, that's worked. Okay, so let's try that. Apologies for this. Yeah. Let's go through. Yep. Thank you. Yep, all good. No worries. Thank you. Okay, so down here you will see, where'd it go? Oh, I thought I saw secure score there. Am I not up the top? There it is. Not having a good day, am I, with this secure score? So you'll see here is the secure score. This is going to give you a rating out of 100, a percentage rating, and again, we'll give you a list of that over time. Now, the important thing here is to go up into this top corner and select the achievable score. This is going to show you what could be achieved with the licenses that you have. As you'll see, I could get to 100% if I applied all the licensing. Now, why this is important and a place to start is if you go to the improvement actions option, it will list in priority order what you should go and implement, and it will give you the score and the rating here. Okay, so this is your to-do list. Just work through these as at a base level. Right, that is a really easy starting point. So let's go into this one here, number 2. And we click on it, and you'll see here it tells me what I should do, how I should do the next steps. It's got the whole action plan here. And then if I want to, I can say, look, I resolved it by, another means. So I can, I could put in here third party app. Okay. The important thing there is that it provides an audit trail of the changes that I've made, the security decisions that I've put in here. But the main thing is go to secure score, look at the improvement actions, and then follow through with what needs to be done here. Okay, that is the easiest starting point. And then you can go to your customer and say, look, over time, we've taken you from a score of this to a score of that. It's really easy for the customer to see the value add because hopefully the amount is going up and going up, right? And another really good thing when you talk to a customer or prospect is to compare it to organizations like yours. So you can see here that organizations like this demo tenant are 45 to 60. Okay, and this generally is above it. And you get to also, you get to also see the deltas here. So without doubt, secure score is the place to start. All right, I'll show you a few more interesting things when we come back from the break. But the question I want to answer about this, which is very common, is what should my secure score be? Well, my advice to you is you should have a secure score of 80 or above. Your aim should be to get to a secure score of 80 or above. That is at best practices and beyond. If you are below 30, you are vulnerable, in my opinion. There are things there that would allow me access to the system that haven't been turned on or enabled. Now, you should be able to pretty much get to 65%, around 65%, by just applying Microsoft's best practices. Whatever Microsoft recommends, if you apply their best practices, you're going to get to about 65%. So that is, to me, the minimum that you should be at. Everybody should be at 65 as a minimum. And then from there, you go through what's left and you aim to get your tenant to 80 or above. And then you aim to get every other tenant that you manage and above. And as mentioned, you make sure that you basically go in and you turn on those options that are shown there to include the achievable score. So you can see what is the maximum I could get to with the licenses that I have in this environment. Okay. And I'm pretty sure securescore.office.com is the correct URL because I did write it down there. Maybe Microsoft's changed it on me. So that is the starting point. Hopefully everybody knows how to do MFA, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail, but Secure Score is the starting point. We'll talk about conditional access as well. But please, please, please start with your own tenant, get your own tenant to at least 65 and continue to improve it. And then go to every customer and get every customer's tenant to at least 65 and keep improving it. And then when you talk to prospects, you will generally find that their secure score is woeful and there's the business opportunity. The worst secure score that I have ever seen was 12. Now you get a secure score of 16 by touching nothing. when you get the tenant. So whoever set it up had gone in and basically made it worse than what it was out of the box. So again, that would be very worrying. All right. Okay. And again, the idea here is that, remember that secure score is Microsoft's evaluation of your environment against the items that they have. It's Microsoft's rating. It will vary. Microsoft will change their mind on this. So how many people here think that it is best practice to force users to change their password every 90 days? Is there anybody out there who thinks that it is still best practice to force users to change their password every 90 days? Well, the reality is it's not. If you go and read the best practice from CISA, from NIST, from all those people, it is not best practice to do that anymore. Okay, so Microsoft may change its ratings based on new information. So again, just beware that secure score is based on Microsoft's evaluation, but it is a very good place to start. Everybody's given me the link to secure score. Again, Microsoft may have changed the URL. Thank you very much for that. I will update my slides with that. But before we take a break, 10-minute break, are there any questions on what I have covered so far? Are there any questions at all on that before we look at taking a 10-minute break? No. There's a few people in there obviously telling me the right URL, which is great. Thank you very much for that. Appreciate that. I will update my slides to cover that off. I don't see any other questions. Okay, do you provide a checklist of these things to work through? At the end of the day, that checklist is going to be in Secure Score, and it will be in you'll get a copy of the slides after the fact, right? So the checklist is sort of up to you, but I'm going to give you, the whole list of things to work through. The first one is to go and look at your Secure Score, see what it is, and then have a look at the recommendations and start working through the list that Secure Score provides. And I will work through more stuff when we get back through the break. The license level required, Mitchell is asking, every single tenant includes Secure Score. Okay, so again, the Secure Score is part of every single tenant, therefore you can use it with that. New Microsoft 365 setup has security defaults turned on. Yes, John, we will talk about security defaults once we get to that. But that is not the be-all and end-all, I would suggest. But first thing is that you get your Secure Score, work to get your Secure Score, commit to get your Secure Score above 65. John's question is, in conditional access, can you demonstrate how to set up and block a certain country region? Again, when we get to conditional access, I can have a look at that. So remind me when we get to the conditional access. We're not there yet. That's a fair way off. But I can do that if you do remind me when we are good to go. Any other questions before we push the button on a 10-minute or so break? Any link or guidance for disabling MSHTA and Cypher issues? Absolutely. And we'll cover that when we talk about Windows, the Windows 10, hardening the Windows 10 environment. So again, if you just do a search on the interwebs, you'll find it. If you have a look at my YouTube channel, lots of different ways of doing that. My advice to you is the simple answer is going to be use Windows Defender application control. That's the way I do it. So again, more a Windows 10 issue, but we can apply that as a policy using Intune and Endpoint Manager. So again, we can have that setting in Endpoint Manager and push it to our devices, which is the best practice, but the actual setting is basically just a registry setting if you want to do that. Any other questions? Again, a lot of this we'll get to. This is only session one of many, so good to see so many questions. I appreciate that. All right, well, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to push the button on a 10-minute break here. I will stop the recording and I will see you all back here in about 10 minutes and we will continue on.